you've ever wanted that smooth, buttery background blur, but have like a cheap kit lens, well, Luminar Neo's Portrait Bokeh AI will help you get that effect. So to access Portrait Bokeh AI, you simply have to go to your Tools section here, open up the Portrait section. You're going to see this option for Portrait Bokeh AI. Simply open it up, and then we're going to get quite a few options here. The amount slider is basically how much blur you want to add in the backgrounds. If I bring this all the way to 100, you're going to see that blur take an effect there. And it's also going to automatically select a mask for you and show you the areas that are in focus, which is the red mask, and the out of focus areas in the background. Personally, I wouldn't use this too much. 50% looks pretty good. For my personal taste, I would probably at the most go at 30, between 20 or 30%. You still want it to look realistic. Now just below we have the brush controls. Focus, it's pretty self-explanatory. Everything in the red mask is what's going to be in focus. So if I were to paint back in here these trees, you'll see that now the tree is a bit more in focus than how it is, when we blurred the background. Now defocus is the opposite. So if I were to brush over her face, all that area now is going to be blurry because we've defocused the image. Now I can also use defocus to paint this back in so that it retains the blur. Next is restore, and restore is handy for a situation like this. Let's say I made a mistake, and then typically you would think, oh, I want to put this back in focus, but you have to be pretty accurate to make that selection. So what you can do is click on restore and just paint over this area. You don't have to be accurate. You can just do it really quickly and it restores it to the original mask. Underneath we have our size options, the size of the brush. Now you can use the slider or you can use the bracket keys. The right bracket key is to increase, the left bracket key is to decrease the size. For softness, you're going to see that as I slide this, see my cursor now is turning, it's got two circles in there. And that really just affects how soft the stroke is. So if I were to change this to defocus, you see the edges are nice and soft there, right? If I bring that softness to 0, now you're going to see how hard that edge is, right? I can bring that softness all the way up. It's kind of like a feathered edge, right? Now let me restore this before I show you strength. With strength, it's how strong the brush stroke is. I'm going to click defocus and go through this mask. It clears it out with one stroke. But if I were to bring the strength down to like 31, and now when I stroke across the body, you see that it barely took anything off there. If I increase it to 53%, we'll do the same thing. And you see it takes off just a bit more, right? For the background section, the brightness, obviously, if you bring it down, you can make the background darker or make it lighter if you bring it to the right. Highlights, glow, basically it's going to give that glow effect, but only to the bright areas, to the highlights. Warmth, you can cool the background down. So if I bring that all the way to the left, you see how cool it makes that image look. It's got a bluish tone. And then to the right, we can warm it up. Now depth correction has to do sort of with depth mapping. So if I bring this to the left, you're going to see it's going to blur out the image even more. If I bring it down all the way, you see how much more blurry that gets. And if I bring it to the right, it brings things sort of back in focus. And then edge correction is for refining the edges. Now I typically don't use this because the mask selection is usually pretty good. So if we zoom in here, we see that the selection's pretty accurate. Pretty good results, right? There are some areas here we can paint in. Let me just make that correction quickly. But if I wanted to refine the edges even more, I could use the edge correction by sliding it to the right. And you'll notice at the top of the head here especially that it's starting to kind of crop in to make those edges a bit more sharper. So if I take that off, you see that top of her head comes back. And especially around the hairs, you see it's a lot more tighter, but it doesn't look realistic. but now it looks like a cutout, right? So now there's two little issues that I have with the portrait bokeh AI. Not a deal breaker. I have a workaround for one of them. But the first thing is, let's look at the original image, right? And I'm going to zoom in here so that you can see what I'm talking about. If you look at the background, the circular patterns here are bokeh balls. It's the result of the f-stop you're using on your lens. And we like that effect. But when you use portrait bokeh AI, you lose that, right? So let's do before and after. And I know for myself personally, I wish there was a way to bring that effect back. So I hope they can make that adjustment in future updates. The second issue I have is that sometimes it takes off too much of the hair. So here's the before and here's the after, and we start to lose detail in the hair. And the problem is if I use the brush tool to bring these details back, it now starts to look unnatural, right? From far, you probably wouldn't notice. And you see even around this area here, you're starting to lose those little fine details of the hair. But fortunately for the hairs, I have a bit of a workaround that can work most of the time. So first I'm going to revert this to the original. And the goal here is to try and keep the hair as natural as possible. First, we're going to duplicate the layer. And the shortcut key for that is D, or you could simply right click and select duplicate layer. Next, we'll head over into masking, select mask AI. Once it's done, we want to click on human so that it selects a subject. As we zoom in, the mask selection does a very good job. And if I were to hide the bottom layer, you'll see the selection that it's made. So I'm going to show this layer again. So with the top layer with the background removed, let's click on the bottom layer, and this is where we're going to apply the portrait bokeh AI. So even if I were to bring this all the way up to 100%, if we look at the hair, you see that we've retained a lot of the details compared to what we saw before. Now, obviously, this is a little extreme, so I would bring this down to where I like it. And yeah, there you go. It looks a lot more natural. Let's zoom in here once again. And I'm going to hide this layer now. Look how nice the hair selection is. I'm going to hide it and now compare that selection. So this is with the hack and this is without. Clearly, we have a better result around the hair, which looks a lot more natural. Another realistic use case for this type of feature is an image like this. I think it's a great photo. It's got a lot of character, but it's a little busy in the background because of all the graffiti. One of the benefits of this feature is you can kind of use the blur to hide the noise just a little bit. So if I do a before and after here, you see all these details just blur out. It's not as distracting and a bit more pleasing to the eye. And this is more about personal taste and personal preference. Same thing with this image. The fence in the background can be very distracting, and if we apply a bit of the portrait bokeh AI, it just makes things look a bit more pleasant. And again, as if you're using a lens at the f1.4, f1.2 f-stop. So in a sense, if you've got a kit lens or a really cheap lens, you could still get that nice blurry background. If you want to learn more about Luminar Neo's portrait editing features, be sure to check out this video. Until the next video, my friends, I'll see you when I see you.